Women like you don't close billion-dollar deals. You serve drinks, not contracts. The words didn't slip, they sliced. They cut through the chandelier glow, through the hum of strings from the corner orchestra, through the thin veil of civility draped over the ballroom. Gasps and laughter collided in the same breath. At the center of it all, a woman in a white dress stood still, phone pressed to her ear. She did not flinch. Her jawline tightened, but her silence was heavier than any rebuttal. The insult came from a silver-haired matriarch, draped in navy satin and diamonds that caught every drop of light. She pointed, laughter rising from her throat like a bell rung for cruelty. Around her, tuxedos and gowns joined in, emboldened by her tone. A man in a bow tie doubled over, shoulders shaking, as if humiliation were the evening's entertainment. The ballroom itself conspired in the mockery. The chandeliers sparkled brighter. The marble floors echoed harder. Every detail magnified the imbalanced grandeur built to protect power, now turned against a single guest. Maybe she wandered in by mistake, another voice jeered from the crowd. Wrong door, wrong dress. The orchestra faltered, a violin note slipping sharp before righting itself. A young server near the champagne table froze, tray trembling in his grip. His eyes darted toward the woman they mocked. He whispered under his breath, "That's not right." She lowered her gaze, listening to the quiet voice on the other end of her call. The words fed directly into her ear, but the ballroom swallowed them whole. What the others saw was not power, not wealth, not ownership. What they saw was a woman they thought could be erased with laughter. Her silence made them bold. The matriarch leaned forward, her diamond bracelet flashing. "This isn't a space for you," she hissed. "My family does not negotiate with frauds." The phrase carried across crystal flutes and mirrored walls. A few guests smirked, raising their glasses as if a toast had been made. But she still didn't answer. She only shifted the phone in her hand, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the chandeliers, past the mocking stares, as though she saw something no one else could. The crowd mistook restraint for weakness. They always did. And in less than an hour, the same family laughing in this ballroom would watch her strip $900 million from their grasp. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Because tonight, silence was not surrender. It was strategy. Vanessa Carter had chosen the white dress deliberately. No sequins, no glitter, just a single unbroken line of fabric that moved like silence through the air. It was the kind of outfit that never screamed money, never begged attention. To the family mocking her, it looked plain. To her, it was armor designed to disappear until the moment it no longer could. The ballroom belonged to the Whitmores, one of the most visible billionaire dynasties in the country. They had built their wealth on steel, shipping, and reputation, the kind of family that bought skyscrapers not for need, but for vanity. Tonight was their prelude, a celebration staged before finalizing a $900 million merger that would tie their empire to hers. She came alone, no entourage, no bodyguards, no assistant weaving through the crowd with a clipboard and a smile. Just herself, a phone pressed to her ear, listening to the last whispers of legal strategy before the contracts were signed tomorrow morning. But the Whitmores didn't see strategy. They saw vulnerability. Her hair was drawn back clean, not styled into a crown. Her jewelry, a simple band on her finger, a small silver line at her wrist, looked modest against the chandelier blaze. To them, modesty meant weakness. To her, it meant choice. At 39, Vanessa had stood in dozens of rooms like this one. She'd been underestimated in every single one. At 24, she'd walked into a boardroom with a flawless pitch and been told by an older executive, "Sweetheart, maybe stick to HR." At 31, she secured a contract worth $300 million, only to hear a rival dismiss her as lucky. Each insult had written itself into her memory like tally marks carved on stone. And now, here she was leading Carter Global, a multi-sector powerhouse with holdings in tech, logistics, and energy. A company that had outpaced every competitor in its class. A company that the Whitmores needed more than she needed them. But they didn't know that yet. The youngest Whitmore, a man in his late 20s with slicked hair and the lazy arrogance of someone who had never earned anything, leaned close to his cousin and muttered, "She looks like she got lost on her way to catering." Their laughter was quiet, but not quiet enough. Guests nearby heard it. Some chuckled, others simply looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Vanessa adjusted her grip on the phone. Her voice, low but steady, flowed into the receiver. Yes, keep the clause in place. No exceptions. If they push back, note it. She listened for a beat, then nodded once, eyes fixed on the far wall as though the mocking crowd wasn't even there. Her silence infuriated them. They expected protest, outrage, an emotional spark they could laugh at. Instead, she gave them nothing. Across the room, a young financial reporter scribbled harder, the words spilling fast onto the page. Mocked at her own deal celebration. She bit her lip, sensing the weight of what was unfolding. The Whitmores mistook the quiet for fragility. But Vanessa knew better. Quiet was pressure. Quiet was patience. Quiet was the fuse they couldn't see burning. And it was almost time to light the room with truth. The laughter didn't fade, it multiplied. Like embers fanned into flame, one cruel remark sparked another. What began as a single insult from the matriarch grew into a chorus of jeers. "Tell me," a younger woman in a crimson gown drawled, swirling champagne in her glass, "how does someone like you even get an invitation here? Did you sneak in with the staff?" Another voice chimed in from the back. A man with the glossy confidence of inherited money leaned against the marble pillar, smirking. "I'll bet security just waved her through. Happens all the time." She probably smiled sweetly, said she was press. Look at her phone in hand, scribbling like a journalist. The joke drew chuckles. Heads turned. The orchestra stumbled again, as if even the music couldn't ignore the humiliation. Vanessa didn't move. She remained by the table, phone still at her ear, listening as her general counsel explained the last detail of the acquisition's escrow structure. Her only response was a soft nod. To the Whitmores, that silence was infuriating. They expected anger, denial, some emotional break they could savor. What they got was stillness, and stillness unnerved them. "Does anyone else see it?" A cousin in a silver tuxedo announced loudly, as if staging a performance. "This whole thing feels like a mistake. Wrong guest list, wrong table, wrong everything." The matriarch didn't stop him. She smiled, proud. It was theater to her, a public stripping of dignity. And in their world, what was dignity worth compared to spectacle? The crowd began to fracture. Some guests whispered behind their hands, unsure whether to laugh or look away. A young woman in the corner gripped her glass too tightly, watching the scene unfold. She wasn't a Whitmore, she was a guest, a client, maybe even an ally. Her eyes flickered with recognition. She knew who Vanessa was. She just didn't dare say it. Not yet. At the champagne table, the young server from earlier whispered again, more audibly this time. "She doesn't deserve this." Another waiter shot him a sharp look, warning him into silence. But the words hung there, fragile and defiant. Vanessa exhaled quietly, ending her call with 3 words. "That will do." She lowered the phone, folding it into her palm, and lifted her gaze. Her eyes swept across the ballroom, once slow, deliberate, unwavering. The smirks wavered, just slightly. But the youngest Whitmore, emboldened by attention, stepped forward. His smile was sharp, practiced, the kind of grin that had gotten him out of trouble his whole life. He raised his glass and announced to the room, "You know what I think? She's here to make a scene, that's all. People like her." He paused for effect. Eyes flicking over her skin, her dress, her silence. They always show up where they don't belong. It's a habit. The words dripped like venom into crystal. A hush followed, sharp and sudden, before the laughter cracked open again, louder this time, harsher, as if cruelty had been licensed. Vanessa remained still. Her stillness was no longer just silence. It was defiance. The room thought they were writing her out of it. What they didn't know was that they were writing themselves into a story they couldn't escape, and the fuse was burning shorter with every word. The ballroom wanted a spark. They wanted her to snap, to raise her voice, to prove their prejudice right. But Vanessa Carter had spent a lifetime refusing to give them that satisfaction. She didn't speak. She didn't rush. She simply placed her phone on the linen tablecloth, screen face down, and rested her hands lightly at her sides. A posture so calm it unsettled the very people who tried to mock her. Silence rolled over the room, but it wasn't submission, it was pressure. The Whitmores misread it. They always did. The youngest one smirked wider, mistaking her stillness for weakness. "See?" he said, half laughing, half performing for the crowd. "She has nothing to say. because she has nothing at all. But Vanessa's eyes told another story. They flicked once toward him, steady and sharp, like the glint of a blade catching light. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her gaze alone unsettled him enough to make his hand tighten on his glass. She remembered being 22, standing in a bank lobby with her first real estate commission in hand. The teller looked at her clothes, not her paperwork, and said, "We'll need additional proof. People like you can't walk in here with this much cash." She'd said nothing then, too, just waited. And 2 decades later, silence was still her weapon. The orchestra faltered again, strings stumbling under the weight of the room's tension. Guests whispered. Some leaned forward as if watching theater. Others shifted uncomfortably, their laughter fading when they realized she wasn't breaking. The matriarch tilted her head, irritated. "You don't even deny it," she pressed, her diamonds flashing in the light. "Because you can't." Vanessa blinked once, slowly, purposefully. Then she inhaled, her breath steady enough to still the tremor in the room. Her calm enraged them. "You're wasting our time," the cousin in the silver tuxedo barked, voice rising. "Get her out." A few heads turned toward security at the door, but no one moved. Not yet. Not while she stood rooted in silence, unshaken. At the edge of the crowd, the young server whispered again, this time with conviction, "She's not afraid." His tray quivered, but his words landed. A journalist nearby scribbled faster. Her eyes wide, she knew what she was witnessing wasn't just arrogance, it was history in motion. Vanessa shifted her shoulders back, her chin lifting slightly. It was a movement so small, yet it changed everything. She wasn't shrinking under their laughter. She was anchoring herself against it. They thought her silence meant surrender. What it really meant was control. She didn't need to fight their noise. She only needed to let it echo long enough to expose them to themselves. And with every insult, with every laugh, the room did exactly that. At first, the only sound came from crystal clinking against marble trays, but then a voice quiet, almost trembling, cut through the laughter. "She's not the problem," the young server said again, louder this time. His tray wobbled in his grip, glasses rattling. Every head near the champagne table turned toward him. He swallowed, face flushing red, but he didn't take the words back. "You are." The crowd hushed. A ripple of discomfort passed through the ballroom, guests shifting, unsure if they had just witnessed bravery or foolishness. From the far corner, the financial journalist finally lowered her pen. She reached for her phone instead, the lens angled carefully toward the scene. "This is wrong," she muttered, voice barely audible but caught by the microphone as she hit record. "This is how legacies end." 2 guests near the orchestra whispered urgently. One woman clutched her pearls and said, "Is anyone else seeing this? This is humiliating." Her companion shook his head. "No, this is dangerous." But not everyone disapproved. A heavy-set man in a tux snorted, raising his glass. "Finally, someone saying what we've all been thinking," he said, nodding at the Whitmores. His chuckle was dry, smug, desperate to stay on the side of power. Vanessa didn't move. She stood where she was, letting the silence between insults grow heavier, letting the voices around her reveal themselves. The journalist's recording light blinked red. She steadied her phone and whispered into the mic, "Mark this moment. A black woman mocked in the middle of a $1 billion negotiation, and she hasn't said a word." The orchestra stopped playing altogether now. The violinists stared openly, bows lowered against their strings. The music couldn't compete with what was unfolding. "Turn that off!" snapped the cousin in the silver tuxedo, pointing at the journalist. His face flushed. "No filming. This is private." She didn't flinch. "Then maybe you shouldn't humiliate people in public." The words struck harder than any bow across strings. Gasps followed. A few claps, tentative at first, then swallowed quickly by fear of reprisal. At the back of the room, a tall man in a charcoal suit, a guest not tied to either side, leaned against the wall. His eyes narrowed. He'd seen this before in boardrooms, in country clubs, in places that were supposed to reek of civility but stank of exclusion. He muttered, "Same story, different wallpaper." Vanessa heard him. Her lips curved slightly, not a smile, but acknowledgement. The Whitmores, however, grew restless. Their control over the room was slipping, thread by thread. What had begun as a performance was now a spectacle they could no longer script. The matriarch's voice cut through, sharper now, less amused. "Enough of this." She pointed again, the diamonds at her wrist trembling under the chandelier. "You don't belong here, and I will not let you poison my family's night." But the words no longer landed as cleanly. Too many eyes had shifted, too many witnesses had begun to question, and the balance in the room had started to tip. The ballroom doors opened with a slow groan, as though the building itself recognized the shift. Conversations hushed, laughter dissolved, and every head turned toward the grand staircase. Descending with calculated weight was Charles Whitmore, patriarch of the family empire. His presence filled the room before his voice did broad shoulders in a tailored midnight tuxedo, silver hair combed to perfection, and eyes that carried the arrogance of 3 generations of wealth. "Enough," he declared, his voice low but resonant, designed to command. The orchestra, already silent, lowered their instruments further. Even the waitstaff froze. He approached the center of the room with unhurried steps, each polished shoe clicking against marble like a gavel striking wood. His gaze landed on Vanessa, standing calm in her white dress. His lips curled into something between disdain and amusement. "My family tells me we have an intruder," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Someone pretending to belong at this table." No one corrected him. The air was too heavy, the hierarchy too ingrained. Charles circled once around Vanessa, inspecting her as though she were merchandise. "You see," he continued, addressing the crowd rather than her, "our events are not open invitations. They're reserved for people who contribute, people who understand legacy." His eyes narrowed. Frauds do not negotiate with Whitmores. Gasps fluttered across the room, though no one dared challenge him directly. Vanessa did not move. Her stillness was sharper than any retort. Charles leaned closer, his breath hot with disdain. "Do you know what my father taught me?" he said, voice just loud enough to carry across the hushed room. "That silence is guilt. And look at you standing mute. Guilt written all over you." The matriarch smirked beside him, emboldened. The cousins laughed again, though softer now, like echoes afraid to fade. A guest near the back muttered, "This is going too far." Another hushed him quickly. The journalist's camera light blinked, capturing every word. Charles straightened, raising his voice so the chandeliers themselves seemed to tremble. "My family does not negotiate with outsiders, with imposters, with—" he paused, letting the venom sharpen the pause, "people who will never be us." The insult hung heavy, soaked in centuries of entitlement. The young server's tray shook violently now, one glass tipping and shattering on the floor. The sound cracked through the silence like thunder. No one moved to clean it. All eyes stayed locked on the confrontation. Vanessa finally lifted her chin, meeting Charles Whitmore's gaze without blinking. Her silence no longer looked like guilt. It looked like defiance. It looked like power contained. But Charles mistook it again. He turned to the crowd, his voice like steel. "Escort her out." The order echoed across marble and glass. Security at the door shifted, uncertain, waiting for the cue. The patriarch believed he had ended the story. But in truth, he had only set the stage for its climax. The order cracked like a whip. "Escort her out." 2 men in black suits moved from the double doors, their earpieces glinting under chandelier light. Their steps were heavy, rehearsed, the kind of stride meant to intimidate. Guests parted instinctively, champagne glasses raised just high enough to avoid shattering from the tension. Charles Whitmore didn't wait. He reached across the polished table, snatched up the thick leather-bound folder resting there, the draft contracts, embossed with gold trim, and with a flick of his wrist, hurled it downward. The folder hit the marble floor with a slap, papers scattering like torn feathers. The sound was louder than it should have been, louder because of what it meant. Gasps filled the air. Someone near the orchestra whispered, "That's the deal, isn't it?" Another voice answered, "Not anymore." The matriarch stepped closer, her laugh sharp as broken glass. "This is our home, our legacy, and we will not be mocked by a pretender." Vanessa stood still. Her eyes dropped briefly to the scattered pages across the floor, then lifted again, calm as stone. She made no move to retrieve them. She didn't need to. The younger Whitmore cousin seized the moment, his voice rising with drunken bravado. "Look at this, contracts she can't even hold on to. If she had any dignity, she'd leave now before she embarrasses herself further." Laughter followed, cruel and brittle, but beneath it, murmurs began to stir, guests shifting uncomfortably, glancing at the journalist's camera, at the trembling hands of the server whose tray now sat abandoned on a side table. The guards stopped just short of Vanessa, waiting for Charles's signal. His voice boomed again. "Remove her." But the hesitation was visible. Even they sensed something unspoken in the air, something not aligned with the arrogance of the family they served. Vanessa finally moved, slowly. She crouched not to pick up the contracts, but simply to brush her fingertips against the marble where they lay. A gesture so measured, so quiet, it drew the room tighter, breath by breath. Then she rose, eyes steady, as if she had absorbed the weight of the insult and transformed it into fuel. She didn't shout. She didn't protest. She simply folded her hands in front of her gaze locking on to Charles Whitmores. The patriarch smirked, mistaking her composure again. "Fraud," he said, spitting the word like a verdict. "Escort her out now." The guards stepped forward. The matriarch smiled wider. The cousins leaned in, eager to watch her dragged across the marble. But the witnesses, the journalist, the server, the few guests shifting uneasily in their seats felt it. The balance was no longer one-sided. The room was no longer laughing. The Whitmores had crossed a line, and the silence in Vanessa's stance promised it would cost them. This wasn't the end. It was ignition. Across the marble in front of 200 witnesses, but Vanessa Carter moved first. She reached calmly into the small clutch at her side, withdrew a second phone, sleek, matte black, its screen glowing the moment her thumb touched it. No passcode, just recognition, just power. The room stilled. Even the guards hesitated, thrown off by the deliberateness of her motion. Vanessa lifted the phone to her ear, her voice low but sharp enough to carry across the ballroom. "Activate Protocol Sigma," she said, each syllable clean, deliberate. The line clicked. A voice answered instantly. "Understood. Freezing negotiations now." Charles Whitmore's smirk faltered, but only slightly. "What is this performance?" he sneered. "More theatrics? More lies?" But the matriarch's smile wavered. She knew the cadence of business language when she heard it. The words "freezing negotiations" cut through her confidence like ice water. Vanessa didn't look at her, she continued, her tone measured, almost surgical. "Notify legal. Flag the escrow account. Suspend release clauses." "Yes, ma'am," the voice replied. "Already in progress." Murmurs erupted across the room. Guests shifted, pulling phones discreetly from pockets, checking news feeds, market trackers, email alert. The journalist's phone buzzed so violently in her hand she nearly dropped it. The Whitmores noticed. Charles barked at the guards again. "Remove her." But neither guard moved this time. Their eyes flicked toward each other, hesitation thickening between them. They were employees, yes, but of whom? The doubt had crept in. Vanessa lowered the phone, her calm unbroken. She placed it gently on the table beside the crystal glasses, her hand resting there as though she had just laid down a royal flush. Then she spoke, not loudly, but with a clarity that carried across every inch of marble and velvet. "This is no performance," she said. "This is procedure." The room rippled. The young server's eyes went wide. The journalist's pen dropped entirely as her recording hand tightened. Charles tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in his throat. "Procedure? You don't even belong here." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her gaze like steel. "You'll wish that were true." Behind her, several guests' phones lit up at once, alerts streaming in. One man at the back muttered, "The markets. Something just happened." Another guest gasped, "The Carter deal frozen?" The cousins' confidence drained in real time, their smirks replaced by confusion. The matriarch's diamonded fingers clenched around her glass so tightly the stem threatened to snap. Vanessa's silence deepened, but this time it wasn't submission, it was command. She had pulled the thread, and the Whitmore's empire was beginning to unravel live, in their own ballroom. The silence that followed her words was thick, almost tangible. Every eye in the ballroom fixed on Vanessa Carter, waiting for explanation, denial, collapse, anything. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and spoke with the finality of a verdict. "I am not a guest in this room," she said evenly. "I am the majority stakeholder in this acquisition, and as of this moment, your $900 million deal is dead." The words detonated like glass shattering under pressure. The journalist's camera trembled in her hand as she whispered into her mic, "She just canceled the deal." The recording light burned red, capturing the eruption. The matriarch's face drained of color, her jewels suddenly heavy, useless weights. She clutched her necklace, eyes darting, searching for a denial that wouldn't come. Charles Whitmore froze mid-breath. His hand, once steady on the back of a velvet chair, tightened until his knuckles whitened. For the first time all night, his voice failed him. He opened his mouth, but no words emerged. The cousins shifted uneasily. The younger one, who had shouted the loudest, stammered, That's impossible, she can't." His protest died when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He yanked it out, eyes scanning the notification, his face turned ash. Around the room, it spread like wildfire. Guests pulled out their devices. Alerts flashed. Messages poured in. Carter Global withdraws. Merger suspended. Whitmores' future in jeopardy. A man in a tux near the back muttered, "She wasn't bluffing." Another gasped, "Oh my God, she owns it." The young server's mouth fell open. He whispered almost reverently, "She's the one." The guards at Vanessa's side dropped their hands, stepping back as though burned. Whatever paycheck they were promised, it wasn't worth crossing the woman who had just collapsed a billion-dollar transaction with a single call. The orchestra lowered their bows, the violinists exchanging looks of disbelief. Even they understood history had just cracked open in front of them. The matriarch shook her head, her voice brittle, desperate. You can't do this. You're nobody." Vanessa's eyes cut toward her, calm and unyielding. "Then why is your fortune unraveling in real time?" The question struck harder than any accusation. The matriarch staggered back, her diamonds dimming beneath the chandelier's blaze. The room itself seemed to tilt. Guests who once laughed now pulled away from the Whitmores, their loyalties dissolving as fast as their investments. What had been a stage for mockery had become a theater of ruin. And at the center of it all stood Vanessa Carter, silent, unshaken, the embodiment of the storm she had unleashed. The Whitmores had believed they were humiliating a stranger. Instead, they had humiliated themselves before witnesses, before cameras, before the entire financial world. And the world was already watching. Vanessa Carter did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her hand hovered briefly over the black phone on the table, then pressed the screen once. A chime echoed through the line. Her assistant's voice answered instantly, steady and clear. "Miss Carter, awaiting authorization." Vanessa's gaze never left Charles Whitmore as she spoke. "Terminate all negotiations with the Whitmore family. Effective immediately." A pause. Then, "Confirmed. Shall I proceed with withdrawal of funds from joint accounts?" "Yes," Vanessa replied, her tone precise, final. "Liquidate all commitments. Freeze pending transfers. Pull every dollar out." The ballroom reacted like a body struck by lightning. Guests gasped, some audibly crying out. Phones buzzed everywhere at once, alerts cascading. $900 M deal terminated. Carter Global exit partnership. Whitmores destabilized. Charles's face contorted, his authority crumbling in real time. "You can't do this," he barked, voice cracking. "We had agreements, contracts." Vanessa's eyes flicked down at the scattered papers still lying across the marble floor. "You tore those agreements yourself," she said, calm but cutting. "Now you live with the consequence." The matriarch staggered toward her, desperation clawing at her tone. "This is theft. You'll regret this." Vanessa's gaze was unblinking. "Number you'll regret thinking dignity was optional." The young cousin, pale and trembling, tried to interject. You wouldn't dare collapse a deal this size." But even as he spoke, his phone lit up again. The numbers were real. The markets were reacting. The Carter name surged while the Whitmore empire trembled. His words died in his throat. The journalist whispered into her mic, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "It's happening live. She's dismantling them right here, right now." "Oh." Vanessa's assistant spoke again through the line. "Accounts frozen. Legal has been notified. Withdrawal process confirmed." Vanessa nodded once, a gesture small but absolute. Then she closed the phone with a quiet snap and placed it back on the table. The sound was louder than the crash of a glass, louder than the gasp circling the room. It was the sound of finality. The guards stepped back entirely now, their eyes fixed anywhere but on the Whitmores. They knew where power resided, and it wasn't with the family they were supposed to protect. Charles Whitmore collapsed into a chair, his chest heaving. The matriarch clutched her pearls with shaking hands. The cousins huddled, whispering frantically, but there was no strategy left to save them. Vanessa Carter stood in the middle of their ruin, unshaken. Her voice, when she finally spoke again, carried across the ballroom like a verdict carved in stone. "You thought you could erase me with laughter," she said. Instead, I erased you with a decision. And with that, the deal, the empire, the illusion was gone. The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It was a courtroom without walls, judgment delivered in silence and disbelief. The chandeliers still glowed, but the light felt different now, colder, harsher, unforgiving. The Whitmores sat broken beneath it, their dynasty stripped bare not by a lawsuit or a scandal, but by a single woman's resolve. Vanessa Carter stepped forward, her heels clicking against marble with the steadiness of a clock striking midnight. Each step sounded like a countdown the family couldn't stop. She stopped in front of Charles Whitmore. He looked smaller now, hunched in his velvet chair, his authority dissolved into fear. The matriarch's hand gripped his arm, trembling. But even together, they couldn't stand against the storm they had summoned. Vanessa's eyes swept across the room, not just the family, but the guests, the servers, the journalist with her camera still recording. She wanted every witness to understand. "I don't need your validation," she said, her voice low but resonant. "I don't need your permission. I don't even need your respect. Because power is not something you grant me. Power is something I already have." The words landed like hammer strikes. Guests shifted, some nodding, others staring wide-eyed at the truth they had just seen embodied. Vanessa turned slowly, her gaze locking on the matriarch who had started it all. "You laughed at me in a room I could buy twice over. You mocked me as though I were invisible. But you forgot one thing. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy." The matriarch's lips parted, but no words came. Vanessa straightened, her final words carrying through the hall with the weight of justice itself. "You thought I came here to prove myself to you. I didn't. I came here to remind you without me, you have nothing. Tonight, your empire ends where your arrogance began." A beat of silence. Then the sound of phones buzzing again, alerts surging through the crowd. The Carter name trending worldwide. The Whitmores trending for all the wrong reasons. The young server set down his tray and whispered, barely audible, "She won." The journalist's camera caught it, amplifying the truth across every platform that would see the footage within minutes. Vanessa turned toward the exit. She didn't storm out. She didn't rush. She simply walked calm, deliberate, untouchable. Guests parted for her without a word, the same mouths that had laughed at her now silenced by awe. At the threshold, she paused once more. Without looking back, she delivered her final line, sharp as a blade. "I don't need to record what happened tonight. I am the record." And with that, she stepped into the night, leaving the Whitmores drowning in the ruins of their own arrogance. The ballroom, once a monument to power, had just become Vanessa Carter's courtroom, and her verdict was final.